your introduction. And we are gonna actually record. We forgot to press record at the beginning and hopefully share this panel discussion with many Generation Citizen classes focusing on this issue and others. So I'd love to just dive in and have each of you speak to why the issue of mental health matters urgently to you and your community. What are you seeing as the negative community and individual impacts as mental health challenges are on the rise? And why don't we start, why don't we go in opposite order with you, Representative Gouveia?
Sure. So I'm also a mom, in addition to being a state representative and a social worker for 25 years. And so I have definitely seen the impacts of mental health on my children who are 20 and 17. I hear about mental health from my constituents, from young people all the time in the legislature, and they have been asking us as adults in the legislature to take action on the mental health crisis. And as a social worker, I know that we don't have enough social workers and therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. And I think that's contributing to a lot of the focus on the issue around mental health, because people are desperate to try to get help and they're really having a hard time finding it.
Great, thank you. What about you, Vladimir?
I would have to agree as well. I think from my perspective, being in the schools, I think the need is great, but the manpower, the supply, the level of support may not match the level of need that's needed. I think students coming out of the pandemic are trying to find, a way to navigate this new normal. They were trying to get through the pandemic with all the different things, remote learning, not being able to see their friends, quarantining. So that had a lot of impacts, a negative impact on students in terms of just like their social emotional well-being, being able to manage stress, their frustration, isolation. So a lot of those things really had a negative impact on their ability to really be themselves in school and really just get the most out of school and really like work to their full potential. But with everything that's going on in terms of the academic demands, there's still all those different challenges that are going on in response to the pandemic itself and all the things, all the impacts it had on their families, them as individuals as well, and trying to navigate that and come out of that with a different perspective. So I think it has been challenging being able to balance the needs of students and also the needs of the staff as well, because teachers also went through some of the similar things that the students have gone through. So really, it's really been all hands on deck all year during the pandemic and as we are coming out. So I think we're going to continue to have this at the forefront, thinking of how we can continue to support each other in our schools.
Thank you. And Beth, what about you?
I would say one of the things that we talk about most often in our organization is prevention, and also about getting access to timely help. And I think more than ever, that's going to be important now. Not only are people navigating their feelings around what's been going on for the past 2 years with the pandemic, but also some stressors and concerns about COVID itself. And I think that a lot of those, especially when it comes to students, most of their support systems are in the school. And that's a piece of their education that was missing during the past 2 years, or however long, that might still be missing, because as we know, many schools were short-staffed in that area. And I think it's really important that we start this conversation as soon as possible, because the sooner we get prevention out there, the more timely access youth will have.
Wonderful. And how about you, Jayliana, as a student in the schools, a young person? Would love to hear about your urgency around this issue.
This issue matters to me so much because I'm just tired of seeing so many other people have to struggle through mental illness with having like no outlet and no resources and being stuck in sort of like this box or this repeating cycle. And it's just so saddening to me. Also, prevention is a huge deal for me too, because last year I lost a classmate due to mental health, and it sort of like got me in gears to motion, and it really like opened my eyes to everything, especially during the height of COVID.
Thank you for sharing that, Jayliana. I'm so sorry for your loss. I think one thing we, in the title of this panel, that we really wanted to point out was the word equity. And how do we address this issue in an equitable way? And I'd love for anyone to jump in. Not everyone needs to share, but I would love to hear thoughts on where you feel inequity lies within the issue of mental health for young people, and where you see difference in access, in how different groups of folks are affected. If anyone wants to chime in on that question.
I would like to. I think one of the things that is of greatest concern when we're looking at legislative issues in my area is that not every city or town has the same kind of budget, and therefore not every school department has the same kind of budget. So even when the best of intentions are there to create a system that can support all students, it's not necessarily feasible. And I think that's where the greatest inequities lie, is in resources.
Going off that, I agree. I think I'm living that firsthand. I'm in the Boston Public School District, and it's a big district, and there aren't enough school psychologists to go around to the different schools. So me, for example, I work at 2 high schools, but technically I'm in 3 buildings because one of my high school has a split building where this under the lower classmen are in a building and then the upperclassmen in a building, and then I'm at another school. So Monday I'm at a school, Tuesday I'm at another, Wednesday I'm back at the first one, and then Thursday and Friday I'm at the second school. So I'm bounced around. I'm not able to see the student that I'm supposed to see enough. So let's say a crisis happens, I'm not in that building. They have to call me from this building, call me from that building. I'm bouncing around, and that's how it is across the district. I mean, there's some school psychologists that are lucky enough to have one school that they can be at, but most school psychologists in Boston either have 2 to 3 schools that they're shuffling between. So I think there lies, the negative impact on the students, because they're going to looking for support, but they see a door that's closed or psychologist that's busy in a meeting when they need them. They're in a moment of crisis. So I think in terms of just really like addressing the need, we have to really address it, not by just talking about it, but really putting the bodies in there to be there, visible for the students, so that I can feel like, okay, we're taking this seriously and we mean what we say.
Yeah, just to sort of jump in for a brief minute. I mean, when I think about inequities, I think both in terms of, even putting COVID aside, what are a lot of our young people and young adults for that matter really contending with? And a lot of it has to do with issues around identity. And so if you are a student of color, a student from a family that is low wage earners, someone put in the chat, refugees, LGBTQ, you have greater burdens of fear and anxiety and lack of support in being able to express and be your true authentic self in every way that you walk on this planet. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are those inequitable burdens on mental health because of racism and xenophobia and anti-Semitism, ableism. I mean, you get the idea, right? If you're not of the, sort of what the mold has always been, or the model has been, a white cisgender middle-class person, then you are considered other. And that othering has tremendous impacts on anybody, but particularly our young people who are trying to, make their way in the world. And then you come on the other side, just what you just explained, Vladimir, is that, and Beth as well, that the resources are not always there. And depending on what school you go to or what community you are living in, you might have more adult supports. We don't always have to have a therapist who's being the support person, but having more adults who are supportive to young people can really offset some of those risk factors. And then in those communities where adults are unfortunately needing to work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and keep a roof over their head, those burdens are even greater on the access to, supportive adults who can help young people navigate some of the challenges that impact health and well-being and sense of self and mental health. And then on top of that, we have this huge, as we've already kind of talked about, this huge lack of the professionals in the field, particularly from communities of color. We don't have enough psychologists and therapists who are men of color, who have been immigrants or who didn't, who immigrated here from another country, who speak a different language, who are bicultural. So we have a need to make some major shifts and investments to truly, in my opinion, address the inequities in terms of the burdens that our young people are carrying, and then in terms of the access to the resources that are simply just not there in an equitable, accessible way.
Yeah, and also having been in the public education system for my entire life, I've really seen inequity rise, whether it be like not having enough books or not having enough desks, whatever the issue may be. But as Vladimir said, our social worker is also shared with 3 schools, and I just thought that was so insane to learn about. And also my school therapist, there's only one of them, and it's for 1,200 students, and I just don't think that they're taking the urgency to this case as it should be, because I feel like there should be way more therapists and way more counselors and way more social workers, but it just isn't that way.
Thank you for sharing around that question. And it feels, so at Generation Citizen, we ask students to identify a system or an institution that they want to focus on to change. And it sounds like the education system or public schools and supporting more adult resources, including guidance counselors and therapists, feels like something we need to talk about when we talk deeply about solutions. I'm wondering if there are other systems that you feel like intersect with this issue and where you're seeing problems with those systems, whether it's maybe another challenge of the education system or healthcare system or other systems in our communities that we really need to focus on to affect change around this issue.
I'll jump in. Definitely the healthcare system. In other countries that have a single payer healthcare system, the mental health care and the behavioral health care system is so much more aligned and easier to access because it's much more seamless. I think also about the impact of housing affordability and whether or not you live in humane housing. If you're not living in housing that feels safe, secure, or that you can actually afford, that causes undue stress and burden, which impacts mental health of parents and impacts the mental health of our young people as well. So I think about those 2 systems in particular. And then of course, nutrition and food access is also another stress and strain that also contributes to housing insecurity. But also it's just really hard to show up for school and be really engaged if you don't have access to nutritious food throughout the day.
Yeah, I would have to agree as well. Those 2 things that popped up to me were the housing instability or stability, and then also just thinking about community violence. That's something that's prevalent. A lot of students are bringing in a lot of trauma that comes from their communities, and they're having to go back into that after school. And school is like the place where they feel the safest and they're given the most support. So going back into their communities may be triggering and re-triggering. So that's something that I think can be a cause for a lot of mental health difficulties as well, just like having to walk around with that trauma, with that stress, and then feeling like you're not understood or feeling like you don't have someone to go to, like you can share those things with, and having to bottle that inside can be really detrimental to their development.
Also, during the past couple of years with the pandemic, a lot of those system issues that you both have mentioned have become more of a personal issue for certain students who might have food security issues at home, but were receiving meals through their school programs or their after school programs, or there might be violence at home and now that's the only place they have, and they were going to school as a safe space. So the impacts of those systems were probably felt more heavily than ever during the height of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just want to jump one more time. And I think there's been a shift in like how we think about schools, because schools provide, like you're saying, provide so much for students, but we have to be able to provide those resources. So we really have to invest in our schools because we're asking our schools to do so much. We're asking them to be shelter, we're asking them to be a place where they find food, where they feel safe. So we're putting a lot of roles and responsibilities on everyone that's in the school building, but we're not working with enough of what we need to really do that job well. And that just becomes frustrating to not only the students, staff, and it kind of trickles down. Yeah.
Really insightful. Thank you all so much. I think a systems-based approach to solutions is important. And I'm wondering what you all think about the cultural norms and stigma that we live with as a community related to even talking about mental health. And going to somebody and having open dialogue like we are today, or just the inspirational video that Athena shared, the bravery around both that and Jayliana speaking today. I'd love for folks to just share what they think if there is an issue around stigma and sort of what we're up against when it comes to that intersecting with all of our systems level issues.
There's absolutely cultural level stigma. And I wouldn't say just, in the way that we always think about culture, or more traditionally think about culture, but in so many different aspects. But there are whole pockets of the population literally around my building that we can't reach because even if we think that we're doing it right, and we're targeting like a particular population, a particular neighborhood, using someone who represents that neighborhood, it's a service that people are hesitant to have other people know they've accessed. And that's a barrier that we're not really sure how to get over, but there are definitely whole populations of people who likely need help that aren't receiving it because of the cultural and other stigmas involved.
Yeah, I agree with what was said, but also me being first generation, it makes it very difficult to talk to my parents about mental health issues because they weren't really educated on the subject. So it makes them think that like, oh, it doesn't exist. But we also have to like evaluate why it is these people think this way. It's because people of color don't necessarily have access to these resources, whether it be fiscally, socially, or even like distance wise.
Yeah, I think the stigma is definitely still there. I mean, I have meetings on IEP meetings where we're with students and parents as well, and you hear comments like, "What does my child have to be stressed about? I'm the one paying all the bills and doing all the hard stuff. They just have to go to school." And you hear that a lot. And I think the one silver lining of the pandemic, if there was one, is that mental health has come at the forefront. I remember coming back to school when we were going back in person. A lot of students were reaching out to me, like students I hadn't spoken to before. They were reaching out, wanting that kind of support. So I think it really made it like, okay, like I really didn't like what I was experiencing during that quarantine time. I really need to talk to someone about this, talk to someone about that. It kind of made it like really like hit home for some. And it really caused us as schools to really like understand, okay, we're going to have a wave of students feeling this way or that way. How do we respond? And I think during the summers when we were trying to plan for this year, we really were intentional about that, thinking about how we can really support our students at a whole school level, because it's really hard to go one by one addressing every single crisis. But if we can really create a safe and supportive, welcoming school building, we can sort of help at that whole school level. And I can talk more about that in the breakout room, but I think that's something that the pandemic sort of helped with in terms of really making mental health be that thing that's on everyone's mind.
I think culturally too, just being in Massachusetts with the mentality of you do it on your own, rugged individualism, I think makes it really, really hard for people, generally speaking, if you're really absorbing that kind of thinking, to be vulnerable enough to say, I need help, to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm scared, or I'm worried, or I'm not okay. And I think, we have the role of social media too, kind of adding on top of this, that, there's this constant projection of my life is fantastic and everything is awesome and hunky-dory all the time. And that's one of the things that I really worry about, is that, even for adults, we're not good at being vulnerable and saying, I don't know the answer, or I need help. And so I think there's just like this larger basic almost kind of conversation that I think is important for us to have around, in order to be in true, authentic relationships, you need to be vulnerable. And like true, authentic relationships are where I get the greatest joy. But it has meant that I have had to learn to undo some of the things that I've learned about, oh, you're too sensitive, or, oh, that's such a wimpy thing to say, or a wimpy way to think, right? Like caring about people is seen as a bad thing. It's seen as a weakness. So I think there's a lot for us to sort of work through, just being in this state and in this country specifically.
Great. Well, I'd love to go down the social media rabbit hole for just a moment, because I'm so glad you brought that up. We've talked a lot about the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic, but certainly social media has been looked at as something that has progressed or enhanced incidents of mental health challenges. So I'd love for anyone to really chime in on their knowledge around that, or what is your lived experience, maybe Juliana, around social media as a negative or maybe positive thing when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, I feel like I see both sides to it. But firstly, like when we first entered the pandemic, the barrier and the line that we saw between school kind of like dismantled. So now like the stress and how anxious people were is now how they were feeling, like in their bedroom or at their house. And this did not translate well. But then there was also the positive side of sort of the stigma talk. I feel like there was a lot of talk of mental health and resources, or at least people trying to help, which I thought was a very good thing to see when everybody was struggling to, and letting them know that it's okay to feel like this, it's okay to get help.
I'm glad that trickled down to a generation younger than my own. I think that was for my generation. I think social media was a help in many ways, because it was keeping people connected who didn't really have any physical connection during the height of the pandemic. So it was good in that respect. But I also think that more people of my generation who might have had social media accounts before, or at least in my own experience of friends and family, were using it more because there wasn't anything else to do, and therefore comparing themselves more to other people that maybe they didn't compare themselves to before, and seeing things that maybe they didn't see. So for example, this one has their whole family living with them, and maybe this person is by themselves, and they're dwelling on some of those things. So I also saw the positives and negatives of it. For our membership, it was good because it was a good way for people to stay connected to one another in a time where normally they would have in-person programming to rely on one another for peer support. But definitely that was like a back and forth, and I have mixed feelings about social media in general, but especially when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, I think with my work, when I talk with students in our counseling sessions and social media stuff come up, I think I always talk about, like, social media, it's a great tool, but like with every tool, you have to know how to use it. So there's ways that you can use it effectively that'll bring you joy, bring you positive vibes. But then when you start to overuse it or use it in a negative way, it can really cause some harm. Especially when you're seeing different things on social media that may be triggering to you and re-traumatizing to you. Those are things to keep, to be aware of. So I think social media has its positive, but if you mishandle or misuse it, it can really cause some serious harm. So I think that's a message I always try to send the students that I work with on effective social media use, because it can really be harmful, especially with cyberbullying. That's something that comes up from time to time in school, and it's hard to sort of manage that, because a lot of the stuff can happen outside of school hours, where like you don't have the support of a therapist or a teacher or a trusted adult to really help you navigate those certain situations. So it can really open up a can of worms. But yeah, it's something I think will continue to be an issue when it comes to just the misuse of social media. But I think it's something that can also be beneficial for our students as well, in terms of staying connected, accessing resources outside of school hours, because there are a lot of positive resources out there that students can use when they're not in school as well.
One of the things that was surprising to me that my now 20-year-old shared with me just before they went off to college, so two plus years ago, was how anxiety producing social media was, because it was 24/7, and how incredibly stressful that is. And as someone who's 47 years old and didn't grow up with social media, I mean, I did grow up with a rotary phone, legit. I grew up before we had remote controls for TVs. I remember having to get up and turn on the TV. So just this like generational difference, and not even understanding and appreciating the level of anxiety that 24-hour cycle really is having on our young people and people who are on it a lot, texting and Snapchat and everything. So
Thank you for going in there and sharing about that particular topic. I feel like we have done a really good job of exploring the issue and kind of looking at some of the root causes and how it's playing out in our communities. And so in a few minutes, we're going to transition to our breakout rooms to explore solutions. But we absolutely would love to invite each of you, before we do that, to share with the broader group about one solution that we can talk about more deeply in the breakouts, that you have seen work, or you hope will work given the right advocacy over the next few years, that you really think can help solve this issue. And maybe Jayliana, I know you're leading a pretty incredible campaign, so if you could, whatever you would like to share, but we'd love to hear from you first.
I definitely think the response to youth mental health would be youth serving organizations. I'm lucky enough to live in a city where there are so many organizations around me. I'm glad I live in the city. But places like PSU, they offer like a way for people not only to partake in social justice, but it's also like a safe place for everyone. They have free Wi-Fi in case you don't have it at home. They have snacks in case you have food insecurity. And it's just like a chill place to like, hang out. And since the PSU is a small nonprofit, they have this grad student there that majored in psychology, but she's also working now to be a social worker. And while she isn't a therapist, she offers ways for like youth to have healthy coping mechanism and to just talk about what's happening in their lives if they can't talk about it at home or with a guidance counselor. And I feel like it's such an amazing thing that I've seen. Well, it's helped me personally too, but also all my other peers that go to the PSU, and it's just amazing overall.
Thank you for sharing. And anyone can chime in next.
Well, I'm always,
Oh, you
go ahead. Well, I'm always going to advocate for more mental health staff in school. I think that's really, really critical. Thinking about the ratios, like the student was saying, Jayliana was saying that one social worker was 1,200 students. That's impossible to serve all those students. So really thinking about having a ratio that is going to be manageable and really effective to provide support that's going to be sustainable for the students that are in your school, and also thinking about a framework of really thinking about how to support the whole school, not just thinking about putting out fires left and right, but how can we support the whole school and making mental health a priority each and every day. I know at one of my schools, there's a period that we set aside each day, advisory period, where we work on different social emotional skills, a time for students to kind of engage in different activities, restorative justice. So really just embedding mental health supports throughout the school day is also important as well.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of reflect on the opportunities for community gathering, like the PSU that you described, and just how important that is to, like you said, just give people a place, young people, a place to just kind of be and to relax and chill and get some resources and services. I think investments in those are what's really needed, in addition to, of course, having more therapists and social workers in the school building. But I also think longer term, we need to make sure that families really do have the money in their own pockets to put food on their table and to meet their basic everyday needs. It pained me that in Massachusetts, we were sort of bragging about the fact that we stood up 1,100 feeding sites when we had to close schools for the pandemic. And that's great because we met this need, but then you have to scratch your head and wonder, but why aren't we just making sure that families can put enough food on their own table, so we're not focused on, these urgent services that we have to stand up in the middle of a global pandemic. We should not have had to worry about that. Families should not have had to worry about that. So I think a lot about the need for focusing on those solutions that work now, but also we know that, if you're able to meet your basic needs, you're much better off emotionally, mentally, physiologically, psychologically, the whole list. So that's how I think about the issues that surround our mental health supports and making those investments.
I would say on a local scale, we're doing as much as we can in terms of legislative advocacy to try to make change around some of the things that have already been mentioned in terms of just, community systems improvement, and improving the mental health system within and outside of schools. But also we offer free education programs for schools where we go out, we talk about mental illness, we talk about suicide prevention, and we bring in youth guest speakers that are in their early 20s who talk about their lived experience while they were in grade school, middle school, high school, which makes it relatable and opens up the conversation. So not saying that our program is the best program, but our program and programs like it are really important because it gets students talking. Almost always after our folks leave a school, we get reports from the teacher who led that program for the day, and students go afterwards to talk to either the school counselor or they talk to a teacher, and those students might not have ever done that before. So whether it's through our programs or otherwise, opening the door for the conversation and making sure that students know that it's okay to talk about those issues and who to talk to is critical.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing and for providing teasers for the next part of our discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Alana to give us instructions, but just want to say thank you for this incredibly rich first part of our discussion. I am learning a lot. I'm excited to share this recording with hundreds of Generation Citizen classrooms in New England and beyond, and they will be calling you all to be guest speakers in their classrooms. So I'll turn it over to Alana for the next part of our discussion.
Thank you, Ariel. And I just want to echo Ariel and thank you all for sharing those wonderful insights and thoughts. And now we're going to break out into 20-minute Q&A discussions. You'll be able to select the breakout room and topic of your choice. One room will focus on a discussion about state level policy and include Representative Govea and Beth Lamar. The second room will include Vladimir Cassius and Juliana Cepeda and center the discussion around school and district level change. And a GC New England staff or board member will join the group to help facilitate the conversation. Before we head into breakout rooms, a quick reminder that when we come back together for a few minutes, there'll be some closing remarks, and then we will also select 2 names at random from attendees here today to win our raffle prizes from COM. And now we're going to break out into the rooms. So in a moment, you should see a window pop up on your screen with the different breakout room topics. Please select which one you'd like to join. If you don't see the pop-up window or notification appear in the corner of your screen, then please look at the taskbar and select Join Breakout Room. And if you have a split screen or minimize screen, you might need to click more on the taskbar and then select Join Breakout Room. So if you don't see any of those options, please hang tight. We'll get to you after the rooms are settled. But right now, we should be transitioning, so thank you.
For those of you who didn't enter a breakout room, feel free to send me a chat or just unmute and let me know which room you'd like to pop into, and I can put you in there.
Sorry, Matt, I might have missed the instruction. You can put me in whatever one.
State level or school level policy, whatever interests you more, Peter.
State level is great. Thank you.
You got it. Same for you, John, if you'd like to go to state level policy or school level policy.
Welcome back, everyone. I think a few folks are still returning to the main room. I think we're just waiting for a few folks to return to the main room. Great. So thank you all for these wonderful panel and breakout room discussions. It's now time to quickly shift gears to announce the 2 raffle winners. And so the 2 winners are Kiana Dugue and Jack Rusley. So congratulations to you both. You will both receive Calm self-care kits and 1-year free memberships to the Calm app. We'll follow up with you after the event to send you your prizes. But before we go, I'd like to thank Athena Holloway for sharing her personal video, as well as our panelists, Representative Govea, Jayliana Cepeda, Vladimir Cassius, and Beth Lamar for sharing your great insights and ideas. And thank you all for joining us this evening, including the many students and teachers who took the time to join us after school today. And then thank you to the GC New England staff and my fellow board and associate board members for being here. And a special thank you to Kate Ratz, to Kayla Matola, Matt Jose, and Ariel Jennings for all your help planning this community conversation. I hope you're all leaving having learned something new or considering ways to help achieve greater mental health equity for youth. I hope you'll stay connected with GC New England after this evening. And if you feel moved to, please take a moment to donate. We've shared a link in the chat. And please save the date for our upcoming Massachusetts and Rhode Island Civics Days, which will be happening on May 27th and June 6th. So we hope to see you there, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Take care, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thank you
So
so
great
much.
to be with
Thanks,
all of
guys.
you. Thank you to
Take
my
care.
panelists. You all rock.
Of course. Thank you,
for-
guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
Take you. Take care.